I was holding a glass of champagne when I saw his Instagram post. 3 words. That was all it took. Half is mine. The caption sat beneath a photo taken from our balcony, the marble one overlooking the city skyline. The one I had custom installed years earlier, right after I closed our first international vendor contract. In the picture, Jason was smiling, relaxed, triumphant. A champagne flute balanced effortlessly in his manicured hand, his body angled toward the sunset like he was posing for a luxury magazine cover. I didn't take a sip. That morning, my logistics technology company had gone public. The stock launched at exactly 9:30 a.m. By 9:42, it had exceeded every projection we'd dared to make. By noon, reporters were calling me the silent innovator of logistics tech. By late afternoon, Forbes ran a feature with my face splashed across it and the valuation printed boldly beneath my name, $2.4 billion. I built it from a storage unit. No investors, no media coverage. 22 years of grinding without applause, packing orders in a freezing concrete box with no heating, sleeping on the office floor with a coat under my head after a break-in the week before. I remember eating canned beans in the back of a delivery truck because rent was due and there was nothing left. Jason wasn't there for any of that. He didn't post selfies back then. He didn't smile about being partners when I was writing code at 3 a.m. with numb fingers. He didn't say, "I've earned it," when there was nothing glamorous to earn. But now he said it all the time. That evening at dinner, he laughed too loudly with his new circle of friends, lawyers' wives, influencers, people with perfect teeth and expensive opinions. He joked about how, once the next funding round closed, he'd be buying an island. He kept repeating that phrase, like a mantra he'd practiced in the mirror. I've earned it. Strange how he never said that when there was nothing to show. Then came the post that broke something fundamental inside me. Jason stood on that balcony again, champagne in hand, wearing the satisfied expression of someone convinced they'd already won. The caption read, "Built from scratch, half is mine, legally." I didn't comment. I didn't message him. I didn't even ask if he was serious. I just stared at the words for a very long time. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with something colder, something methodical, like watching someone step forward confidently without realizing they're walking straight into a trap you finished building years ago. Because what Jason didn't understand was simple. He thought he'd married the CEO of a successful company. He had no idea he'd married a woman who never actually worked for that company at all. And by declaring half is mine, he'd just pulled on a thread that had been waiting, silently, for exactly someone like him. I'm Linda Karishma. And before anyone knew my company's name, before the headlines, before the valuation, before the word billion ever sat beside my face, I was just a woman with a laptop that overheated, a stubborn idea no one wanted to fund, and a kind of patience that only grows when you've had to survive disappointment for most of your life. I was 38 when the story people love to romanticize began. Back then, I didn't look like the kind of founder investors took seriously. I didn't have the polished pitch cadence. I didn't have the right connections. I didn't even have the right wardrobe. My shoes were always slightly scuffed. My hair was always tied up in a practical knot, and I carried the smell of warehouse dust on my clothes like a second skin. But I had something else. I had a mind that wouldn't stop solving problems. I worked in logistics long enough to understand how ridiculous it was, how absurd it felt that billions of dollars could be lost every year because people still routed shipments the way they had 10 years ago. The inefficiencies were everywhere. Warehouses overstocked on the wrong items, delivery trucks driving half empty, vendor contracts written like vague promises instead of executable systems. Most people complained. I built. At first, it wasn't a company. It wasn't even a plan. It was just code in a private repository, written late at night after my day job, my fingers aching, my eyes burning from staring at the screen too long. I rented a storage unit and set up 2 folding tables like I was playing house with my future. A server rack held together with duct tape in desperation, a cheap space heater that worked only when it wanted to. That's where I met Jason. Not in some cinematic way. Not at a gala. Not at a tech summit with a violin quartet and champagne. I met him at a friend's birthday dinner, one of those casual nights where everyone is pretending they aren't exhausted. I almost didn't go. I was behind on a vendor routing simulation that kept breaking at the worst possible moment, and my brain was still stuck in numbers and roots and probability trees. I remember Jason leaning across the table and asking, "So what do you do?" I could have given him the simplified answer, but I didn't. I told him the truth. I told him I was building a logistics technology platform that would solve routing inefficiencies using predictive learning models and contract logic, something like that. I was nervous, talking too fast, hands moving as if I could physically shape my idea into something easier to understand. Most men would have smiled politely and looked away. Jason didn't. He listened. Not because he understood, he didn't, but he liked the way my ambition made him feel. I didn't realize that at the time. I thought he was impressed by me. He said, "That's intense. You're like one of those women who can build an empire from nothing." I laughed because it sounded ridiculous, but something in me softened anyway. Jason was charming in a smooth, practiced way, good at reading people, good at asking the right questions, good at making you feel like your answers mattered. He worked in business development, which meant he wore nice shirts and talked like everything was a negotiation. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich either. He lived comfortably, liked nice restaurants, and always knew the name of the newest place everyone was talking about. When we started dating, he was attentive. He texted first. He planned dates. He showed up with little gestures, coffee at my office, a scarf when it got colder, a new charger because he noticed mine was frayed. He'd sit beside me while I worked and tell me I was inspiring, that he'd never met anyone with my drive. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because the truth is, when you spend years building something alone, you start to forget what it feels like to be seen as a woman, not just a machine that produces solutions. Jason made me feel like I didn't have to be hard all the time. Then the company started to grow, slowly at first. A few contracts here, one vendor partnership there. The first time a mid-sized distributor agreed to pilot my routing system, I celebrated alone in the storage unit with a cheap bottle of champagne and no one to clink glasses with. Jason didn't come that night. He said he was tired. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need a cheerleader. I didn't need anyone. I had my work. But it kept happening like that. Little absences that I kept excusing because I was too busy, too focused, too grateful to have someone at all. When I finally moved out of the storage unit into a small office space, I was proud in a way I didn't know how to express. I ran my fingers over the office key like it was proof that I wasn't crazy for believing in myself. Jason came to see it once. He stood in the doorway, looked around, and said, "Wow, so this is where you'll be like running your empire?" The tone was playful. But something about the word empire sat wrong in my chest. Not because I didn't want it, because I didn't want it to become a prop. Still, I ignored the feeling. That's what I did back then. I ignored small discomforts the way you ignore a faint rattling sound in your car when you're too busy getting to the destination. Our relationship grew around my work. My schedule dictated everything. Jason said he understood. He said he admired it. He even joked to his friends about how he'd married a woman who could outwork anyone. When he proposed, he did it the way men like him imagine proposals should happen. Expensive restaurant, ring box, soft lighting, a speech that sounded like it had been practiced. He said, "I want to build a life with you. I want to be on your team." I remember staring at the ring, the diamond catching the candlelight, and thinking, team. Yes. That's what I want. Someone on my team. So I said yes. And for a while, it looked good. The photos, the wedding, the way people smiled and said we were power couple material. But even during an early marriage, there were small signs I didn't fully understand. Jason loved telling people we were building something. He used we the way someone uses a borrowed jacket, like it fit simply because he put it on. He loved coming to company dinners when the room was full of important people. He loved standing beside me when cameras were around. But when things were hard, when I was stressed, when a contract fell through, when I needed quiet support, he would fade into the background, like a man who didn't know what to do with a woman who was struggling without glamour. And then, as the company really began to win, big contracts, expansion, attention, Jason changed in ways I tried not to name. He started caring more about optics, more about who knew us, more about how our home looked, how he looked, how I looked. He asked questions like, should we upgrade the car? And do you think this house looks successful enough? And do you realize people will expect a certain lifestyle now? At first, I thought it was normal. Then he started inserting himself where he didn't belong, suggesting things about branding, asking for meetings with executives, calling my company ours in public in a way that made people nod because they assumed husbands were automatically entitled to stand in the center of their wife's achievements. My discomfort became a quiet, constant thing, but I didn't confront it because in my mind, confronting him meant risking instability, and I had spent too long building stability from nothing to gamble it on a feeling I couldn't fully explain. So I kept going. I kept building. And Jason kept smiling for the camera. Until the morning, my company went public. Until the champagne. Until the balcony photo. And those 3 words that told me exactly what he thought this marriage was. Not love. Not loyalty. Acclaim. Looking back, I can trace the shift with unsettling precision. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single argument, no dramatic betrayal that announced itself loudly. Instead, the change arrived the way rot does, quietly, slowly, hidden beneath something that still looked solid from the outside. Jason began acting like my company was a shared inheritance waiting to be collected. At first, it came disguised as concern. "You work too much," he'd say, leaning against the kitchen counter while I reviewed contracts on my tablet. "What's the point of building all this if you don't enjoy it?" I'd look up, tired, and answer honestly, "I do enjoy it. This is how I enjoy it." He'd smile like he understood, but the next comments always followed. "Still," he added once, swirling his wine, "now that we're married, shouldn't we start thinking more jointly?" Jointly. That word again. It started appearing everywhere. Joint decisions, joint future, joint sacrifices. He talked about it like a principle, like a philosophy. But every time he said it, I noticed something uncomfortable. It never applied to effort, only to outcome. When the company began expanding internationally, I spent weeks traveling, long flights, windowless conference rooms, conversations that required total focus because one wrong word could cost millions. Jason came with me once to Paris, not because I asked him to, because he wanted to experience the moment. He stayed in the hotel while I spent 12-hour days negotiating vendor frameworks. At night, he complained that I was distracted, that I didn't seem present, that I didn't appreciate how lucky we were to be there. "You're always in your head," he said one evening as we sat in a restaurant I barely tasted. "Can't you just enjoy where we are?" I wanted to tell him that I was enjoying it, that watching a system I'd designed finally work across borders felt like standing inside a living thing I'd created, but he wouldn't have understood. So I apologized. That became a pattern. The more successful I became, the more Jason talked about us as if we were a brand. He began introducing himself not as my husband, but as someone involved in the vision. People assumed he had a role. He never corrected them. At company events, he positioned himself just close enough to me that people would look at him when they praised my work, as if approval could transfer through proximity. "Jason must be so proud," someone would say. And he'd respond, "Of course, we've been through everything together." I would smile, but inside something tightened. Then came the questions, not about how the company worked, but about what it was worth. "How much do you think your shares are now? What happens if someone tries to buy you out? Do you have a plan for when you cash out?" He started asking these things casually, like someone asking about weekend plans. But the timing was always wrong. Always when I was tired, always when I was emotionally exposed. Once, I said carefully, "Jason, I don't think about it like that." He laughed. "You should. This is our future." Our. I began noticing how his family spoke too. His mother, Elaine, started calling me more often, not to ask how I was, but to ask how the company was doing. "So proud of you, dear," she'd say brightly. "Jason tells us everything. It must be nice knowing you're set for life." Set. The word landed wrong. At a family dinner, his brother joked, "So when are you guys retiring? Early 30s, right?" Everyone laughed. I forced a smile. No one asked about the nights I slept in my office. No one asked about the risk. No one asked about the years I built this alone. They talked like the outcome had always been guaranteed, and Jason never corrected them. Then there were the changes in his friends. Suddenly, our dinner table filled with people who spoke in legal phrases and investment jargon. Women with polished faces, and men who talked about leverage like it was a personality trait. They complimented my success the way people admire real estate. Jason soaked it in. He started dressing differently, more tailored, more expensive. He spent hours grooming himself before events he never would have cared about before. He practiced answers in the mirror, casual lines that made it sound like he was part of the engine, not just riding in the passenger seat. One night, after a particularly long week, I came home to find him rearranging the living room. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Optimizing," he said. "This place should reflect where we are now." I stood there, exhausted, watching him move furniture I'd chosen carefully back when this house still felt like shelter instead of a stage. "I liked it the way it was," I said quietly. He didn't look at me. That was before. Before what? Before I became valuable enough to redesign? That night, lying beside him in bed, I realized something that scared me. Jason didn't see my work as something I did. He saw it as something that had happened to us, like winning the lottery. Something external, something divisible. The next morning, I found him on his phone, scrolling through social media profiles of tech couples, founders and their spouses, smiling in staged photos. "Look," he said, holding the screen out to me, "they really market themselves well." Market. U.S. I felt a chill run through me. Not fear. Recognition. Because suddenly the small things aligned into something clearer. Jason wasn't planning to leave. He was planning to claim. And I understood, with growing unease, that the problem wasn't that he didn't understand my company. It was that he thought understanding wasn't necessary. Ownership in his mind came from proximity, from marriage, from standing close enough to the fire to feel entitled to the heat. And I had ignored the warning signs long enough that the warmth had already turned dangerous. The morning everything broke open didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt ordinary. Quiet, even. I woke up before Jason, slipped out of bed, and stood barefoot in the kitchen while the coffee brewed. The house was still, sunlight just beginning to stretch across the marble floor. From the outside, it looked like the life people envied, the kind of morning lifestyle blogs tried to sell. I checked my phone, out of habit. That's when I saw it. The notification wasn't from a reporter or an investor or anyone connected to the IPO. It was a tagged post. Jason's. At first, my brain didn't process the words. I stared at the image instead. The balcony, the skyline, the champagne flute. The same spot I'd stood on less than 12 hours earlier, exhausted, shoes kicked off, thinking about vendor integrations and employee retention. Then my eyes moved to the caption. "Built from scratch, half is mine, legally." Something in my chest went very still. Not tight, not shattered, still. I scrolled through the comments. Fire emojis. Congratulations. Power couple. Love seeing a man support his wife's success. One comment stood out. "Wow, didn't know Jason was co-founder. Respect." Jason had liked it. I read the caption again, slower this time. Legally. That word wasn't decorative. It wasn't emotional. It was intentional. I didn't wake him. I didn't confront him. I finished my coffee in silence, tasting nothing, my mind already moving, not emotionally, but structurally. I was cataloging, connecting dots, replaying conversations from years ago with a new clarity that made my stomach turn. At breakfast, Jason acted normal, too normal. He kissed my cheek, poured himself coffee, scrolled through his phone like a man who hadn't just publicly declared ownership over something he'd never built. "Big day," he said lightly. "Everyone's talking about you." About you. Not us. I watched him carefully, the way you watch someone when you realize you may have misunderstood who they are. "I saw your post," I said. He didn't look up. "Oh? Yeah, crazy, right? It's blowing up." "Half is mine," I repeated quietly. He finally met my eyes. For a fraction of a second, just a fraction, something flickered across his face. Calculation. Then he smiled. "Linda," he said, laughing softly, "don't be so literal. It's just social media." "Is it?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. "Come on, we're married. What's yours is mine. That's how it works." The casual certainty in his voice was worse than anger. "What exactly do you think is yours?" I asked. He shrugged. "The life, the company, the future. You didn't do this alone." That was the moment, not the post, not the caption. That sentence. You didn't do this alone. I felt my pulse slow instead of spike. "Jason," I said carefully, "you know that's not true." His smile thinned. "I supported you." "You enjoyed the outcome," I replied. That's when his tone changed. "You're being defensive," he said, "and honestly, a little ungrateful." Ungrateful. For what? For letting me work myself into the ground while he curated a lifestyle around my labor? "You should take the post down," I said. His jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because it's inaccurate." "Inaccurate legally?" he asked, his eyes sharpening. "Or just inconvenient?" The word legally came out again, too easily. "I don't like what you're implying," I said. He stood up, suddenly taller, suddenly unfamiliar. "I don't like being minimized. I've been standing beside you for years." Beside. Not behind, not building. Beside. "You don't get to rewrite reality," I said quietly. He laughed then, not kindly. "You think a judge cares about who wrote code at 3 a.m, he said. "Marriage is partnership. Courts understand that." There it was. The inciting truth. This wasn't about pride. It was about preparation. "You've thought about this," I said. He didn't deny it. "I've thought about fairness," he replied. "About not being cut out after everything." Cut out. As if he'd been woven into the foundation. I looked at him, really looked, and understood with chilling clarity that the man standing in my kitchen wasn't confused or emotional. He was confident. Confident enough to make claims publicly. Confident enough to believe the system would protect him. That afternoon, while he was on a video call, laughing, showing off the pool to someone who kept calling him babe, I walked past the bedroom without a word. I went to the one room he never entered, my office. He always said it was too serious, too boring. He never asked what was in the locked drawers. I turned on the desk lamp, opened the hidden compartment, and pulled out the leather-bound binder I hadn't touched in years. Not because I'd forgotten it, because I'd hoped I never needed it. Jason thought he'd married a woman who built companies. He had no idea I'd spent years building something else entirely. Something designed for moments exactly like this. And with one careless post, he had just activated it. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I sat there in my office, the desk lamp casting a narrow circle of light over the leather-bound binder, and waited for the emotional collapse everyone talks about. The shaking hands, the racing thoughts, the urge to scream or break something. It never came. Instead, there was a strange quiet inside me, like the moment after a storm warning when the air stops moving and everything feels suspended. I ran my fingers along the edge of the binder, grounding myself in the physical reality of it, the weight, the texture, proof that this wasn't paranoia or overthinking, proof that a part of me had always known this day could come. Still, a question echoed in my head, soft but persistent. How did I let it get here? Not in a self-blaming way, but in the way you review a system failure after the fact. tracing where the safeguards were ignored because they seemed unnecessary at the time. I thought about the nights Jason complained I wasn't present enough, the way he'd framed my focus as neglect, the times I'd apologized for building the very thing that now gave him confidence to threaten me. I replayed the moment he said, "You didn't do this alone," and I realized something painful. He believed it. Not because it was true, but because I had allowed the illusion to exist long enough that it hardened into certainty. I closed the binder. Not yet. I wasn't ready to act. I needed to understand myself before I confronted him again. That night at dinner, I watched Jason the way you watch someone after learning a secret they don't know you know. He talked about scheduling interviews, about how we needed to manage public perception now, about how my silence online made people curious. "You should comment on my post," he said casually. "It makes us look united." United. The word felt heavy in my mouth. "I'm tired," I said instead. He frowned. "This is important." "So is trust," I replied. He rolled his eyes. "You're overreacting." That was when the hurt finally surfaced, not as tears, but as clarity. Jason wasn't scared. He wasn't worried about our marriage. He was irritated that I wasn't playing my role. Later that night, lying awake beside him, I stared at the ceiling and let myself ask the question I'd avoided for years. What am I responsible for here? Not his behavior, mine. I was responsible for staying silent when discomfort first appeared, for prioritizing stability over honesty, for letting we replace I in rooms where I'd done all the work. But I was also responsible for something else: preparation. Years ago, in a cheap hotel room in Reno, I'd made a promise to myself after watching a close friend lose control of his own company in a brutal divorce. I'd told myself I would never let my life's work become leverage in someone else's emotional reckoning. I had believed in my marriage, but I had protected my work anyway. That wasn't distrust. That was wisdom. The next morning, Jason didn't say goodbye when he left. A small thing, but it confirmed everything. I spent the day going through meetings like normal, my voice steady, my face composed. No one suspected anything was wrong. That's the advantage of being a woman who's had to perform competence under pressure her entire life. You learn how to compartmentalize without bleeding through the seams. That evening, when he came home, I decided to confront him. Not emotionally, but directly. "Are you planning to file something?" I asked. He froze. Just for a second. Then he scoffed. "File what?" "Legal paperwork," I said calmly. "About the company. About us." His jaw tightened. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being precise." He crossed his arms. "Maybe I should protect myself. You've changed." That word again. Protect. I nodded slowly. "So have you." He stared at me, searching my face for something. Fear, maybe. Uncertainty. He didn't find it. That night, after he fell asleep, I went back into my office. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the binder. I reviewed the diagrams, the licensing structures, the trust documents. Every clause I'd memorized but hoped would never matter. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed to be honest with myself. This marriage was no longer a partnership. It was a liability. And the most dangerous thing about Jason wasn't his confidence. It was his belief that I wouldn't act, that I'd keep choosing peace over truth. He was wrong. The escalation didn't begin with shouting. It began with paperwork. Jason stopped pretending. 2 days after our last conversation, I came home to find an unfamiliar envelope on the kitchen counter. Thick, cream-colored, placed deliberately in the center like a statement piece. No note, no explanation. Just presence. I didn't open it right away. I cooked dinner. I ate alone. I washed the dishes slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to feel whatever I needed to feel before I let the situation move forward. Only then did I break the seal. A preliminary filing notice. Not a divorce petition yet. Something more strategic. A formal request for disclosure. Asset clarification. Language wrapped in legal politeness, but heavy with implication. Jason wasn't leaving. He was positioning. When he came home later, he didn't look apologetic. He looked resolved. I didn't want it to be like this, he said, loosening his tie. But you're not giving me much choice. I held the papers up. You sent this before we even talked. We talked, he replied. You just didn't listen. I studied him. The way his shoulders squared, the way his voice stayed measured, rehearsed. He'd practiced this. You filed a claim, I said, while still using company resources. His eyes flickered. I'm allowed to. You're assuming that, I replied. He smiled thinly. I have a lawyer. So did I. He didn't know that yet. Over the next week, the pressure multiplied. Jason's mother called me twice in one day. You're tearing the family apart, she said, not unkindly, but firmly. Jason sacrificed years for you. I asked her calmly, can you tell me one specific sacrifice he made? Silence. Then indignation. That's not the point. Of course it wasn't. Friends started reaching out. His friends. People who'd once praised my work now spoke in careful tones about compromise and fairness. You don't want this to get ugly, one of them warned. Ugly. I wondered what they thought ugly looked like. Jason began staying out late, attending meetings he'd never mentioned before. When I asked where he was going, he accused me of interrogating him. When I stopped asking, he accused me of pulling away. Gaslighting. Dressed as concern. Then came the post. Another one. Not as bold as the first, but sharper in implication. A reminder that marriage is partnership, and partnerships mean shared success. The comments filled with speculation. People love ambiguity. That night, something shifted in me. Not anger. Resolve. I walked into my office, closed the door, and turned the lock. For the first time since the IPO, I opened the bottom drawer fully and pulled out the binder and the USB drive together. This was no longer about being careful. This was about containment. I didn't need to confront Jason again. Not yet. I needed to let the structure speak. The next morning, while he was out running errands, the process server arrived. Not for me. For him. Jason stood frozen in the entryway as the envelope was handed over, his confident posture cracking just slightly. What is this? He asked. I leaned against the doorway. You filed. The system responded. He laughed nervously. What system? I didn't answer. By the afternoon, his access began disappearing. First, his company email, then his cloud folders. By evening, his building badge stopped working. He stormed into the house, panic bleeding through his composure. Something's wrong, he said. IT locked me out. I met his gaze steadily. Did they? You did this, he accused. You're trying to scare me. No, I replied. You triggered a clause. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. What clause? I picked up the binder and placed it gently on the table between us. The one you never asked about. For the first time, Jason looked uncertain, not angry, afraid. And I understood something then, something crucial. He had built his confidence on assumptions. I had built mine on architecture. This wasn't a fight of emotions anymore. It was escalation by design, and he was already losing ground. The house had never felt so large. After Jason stormed out that night, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the framed photos on the wall, I stood in the entryway long after the echo faded. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing in from every corner, filling rooms that once held shared routines and easy assumptions. I didn't move right away. I let myself feel it. The grief, not of losing him, but of losing the idea of him. The man I thought I married. The partner I believed existed before ambition and entitlement stripped the illusion bare. I walked through the house slowly. The living room, where we hosted dinners for people who praised my success and treated him like an accessory. The kitchen, where I'd apologized for working too much. The bedroom, where I'd lain awake, convincing myself discomfort was normal. Each space felt unfamiliar now, like a set after the actors have left. I sat not to cry, to breathe. Because for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to admit the truth I'd been outrunning. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a public unraveling. Jason knew people. He knew how narratives worked. And I was about to be painted, not as a woman protecting her life's work, but as someone cold, calculating, ungrateful. The thought hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed approval, but because I'd spent years earning respect in a world that already expected me to fail quietly. Now my marriage was becoming the lens through which people would judge everything else. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark listening to the house settle, replaying every moment that led here, questioning whether I could have stopped it sooner, if I'd confronted him earlier, if I'd drawn clearer lines, if I'd trusted my instincts instead of silencing them. The self-doubt crept in like fog. By morning, exhaustion wrapped around me like a second skin. I skipped breakfast. I ignored messages. I sat in my office staring at the wall, the binder closed on the desk like a sealed verdict. And then the calls started. Jason's lawyer left a voicemail, measured, professional, edged with threat. We advise your client to restore access immediately. This will be viewed unfavorably. His mother texted, "This is cruel, Linda. You're humiliating him." Cruel, humiliating. As if he hadn't publicly claimed half my work before asking a single question. As if protecting myself was a moral failure. That was the lowest point. Not the anger. Not the fear, the isolation. Because suddenly I understood how easily a woman could be surrounded by voices telling her to be reasonable, while quietly stripping her of everything she built. I walked outside, barefoot on the cold stone patio, the city stretching out below me. The balcony, the same one Jason had posed on, felt like a ghost of itself. For a brief moment, doubt whispered something dangerous. What if I just give him something? What if this ends quietly? Peace at a price. That temptation scared me more than anything else, because it meant part of me still wanted to shrink, still wanted to smooth the conflict so I wouldn't be seen as difficult. I closed my eyes, and I remembered that woman in the storage unit, tired, alone, stubborn enough to keep going when no one was watching. She didn't build all this so she could be erased politely. That realization didn't feel empowering. It felt heavy. Like accepting that there was no way out that didn't cost me something. The dark moment wasn't when everything collapsed. It was when I realized I had to stand alone and let the structure I'd built do what it was designed to do, even if it meant being misunderstood. That night, I opened my laptop, not to fight, but to prepare, because the turning point was coming. And once it arrived, there would be no soft landings left. The turning point didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with confirmation. 3 days after Jason's access was revoked, my attorney, Catherine Miller, called me just after sunrise. Her voice was calm, controlled, the way it always was when something important had settled into place. "It's done," she said. I sat up in bed, the weight in my chest shifting slightly. What exactly is done? "The trigger completed," she replied. "Clause 17B executed cleanly. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation." I closed my eyes. Not in relief. In acceptance. Because once that clause activated, there was no emotional undoing it. No apology could reverse it. No conversation could soften its impact. Jason had crossed a line that didn't bend. Catherine continued. "The arbitration venue is locked. Delaware. Closed proceedings. His legal team can argue optics all they want, but structurally, they're finished." Finished. The word didn't make me smile. It grounded me. Later that morning, I received the first message from someone neutral, not a friend, not family. A compliance officer from the company. "We wanted to inform you that Mr. Jason Karishma's credentials were terminated under hostile actor protocol. Please advise if further action is required." Hostile actor. I read the phrase twice. Jason had never understood this wasn't personal. It was procedural. He showed up at the house that afternoon, unannounced. No suit, no confidence. Just a man holding his phone like it might betray him again at any second. "They erased me," he said the moment I opened the door. "I can't access anything. People aren't returning my calls." I stepped aside to let him in, not out of kindness, out of closure. "They didn't erase you," I said. "They removed unauthorized access." He stared at me like I'd slapped him. "You're acting like I'm a criminal." "You acted like an owner. I replied. Silence stretched between us. I just wanted security, he said finally. I didn't think... That's the problem, I said gently. You didn't think you needed to understand. You thought marriage replaced due diligence. His voice cracked. I stood by you. You stood beside the result, I corrected, not the work. He sank onto the couch, shoulders collapsing inward. What am I supposed to do now? That question, so naked, so unguarded, almost broke me. Almost. But then I remembered the post, half as mine, legally. And I understood that this moment, this vulnerability, wasn't growth. It was consequence. I'm not your system anymore, I said. He looked up, eyes red. You planned this. I nodded. Years ago. Not against you, against the possibility of this. That was the moment his anger evaporated, replaced by something else. Recognition. Not of the structure, but of me. You never trusted me, he said quietly. I trusted you emotionally, I replied. I just didn't confuse trust with exposure. He left shortly after. No shouting, no accusations. Just the sound of the door closing on a future that had been built on assumption instead of understanding. That evening, Catherine forwarded me a copy of the arbitration acknowledgement. The case had moved out of the public narrative, out of spectacle, into a space where contracts mattered more than charm. I stood on the balcony alone, the city lights flickering below me, and realized something profound. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was standing still while the world adjusted around me. The turning point wasn't that I'd won. It was that I no longer needed to explain myself. The structure spoke, and it spoke clearly. The fallout didn't explode. It collapsed. Quietly, methodically, without spectacle. Within days, Jason's narrative began to unravel. Not because I corrected it, but because the world stopped reinforcing it. The people who once smiled politely and let him speak as if he belonged at the center of my work suddenly went silent. His calls stopped getting returned. The group chats went quiet. Invitations dried up. The same social circle that once treated him like proximity royalty now treated him like a liability. I heard about it secondhand. A board member mentioned, almost apologetically, Jason reached out, asked if there was confusion. We told him everything was clear. Clear. That word kept surfacing, because clarity is ruthless. His lawyer filed an emergency motion anyway, an attempt to reframe the situation as marital retaliation. It was denied within 48 hours. Jurisdiction had already shifted. Arbitration had already begun. The doors he thought he could walk through had quietly locked behind him. Jason's mother stopped calling. When she did reach out once more, her message was short. We didn't know. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, because there was nothing left to explain. Jason tried another angle. He reached out to former colleagues, people who'd once laughed at his jokes during company dinners. One of them forwarded me a screenshot. He wants to know if you'll reconsider for the sake of optics. Optics. The word felt hollow now. The truth had its own gravity. His public image deteriorated without me ever touching it. People began asking the questions he'd never prepared for. What did Jason actually do? Was he really involved? Why did his lawyer withdraw? Even online, the tone shifted. The comments under his old posts grew skeptical. Screenshots circulated. The "half is mine" caption was dissected, then quietly deleted. Too late. Meanwhile, his access to resources continued to dissolve. The shared accounts were frozen, pending review. Certain transfers were flagged for audit. Nothing dramatic, just the slow tightening of systems that no longer recognized him as authorized. The House followed. The lease transfer executed at the end of the quarter. Movers arrived with calm efficiency, no confrontation, no raised voices, just paperwork. Jason wasn't there when it happened. I was. I stood in the hallway as the foreman explained the process, nodding like this was any other operational task. Because it was. When the last piece of furniture was wheeled out, the house felt strangely lighter, empty, but honest. Jason tried once more. A message. I never meant to hurt you. I read it. then archived it. Not because it wasn't true, but because intention doesn't undo impact. The final arbitration summary arrived 2 weeks later. No equity awarded, no shared ownership recognized, no entitlement established. The language was dry, final. Jason's legal team withdrew formally. The system did what it was designed to do. By then, he had become a cautionary tale, whispered at dinners and boardrooms, not with cruelty, but with distance. The kind reserved for people who miscalculate power. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Free from explaining. Free from shrinking. Free from pretending partnership existed where it never had. I packed a small bag that night, not to leave in shame, but to step forward. The city lights looked different when I wasn't sharing them with someone who thought they belonged to him. I stood on the balcony one last time, the marble cold beneath my bare feet, the city stretched out in quiet confidence below me. The skyline hadn't changed. The buildings still glowed. The traffic still pulsed like a living system. My company's logo still lit the side of 3 towers across the river. What had changed was me. For years, I believed strength meant endurance, absorbing discomfort, smoothing tension, proving loyalty through silence. I believed that if I worked hard enough, loved generously enough, clarity would arrive on its own. It didn't. Clarity arrived the moment I stopped explaining myself. Jason thought marriage granted entitlement. I learned that partnership requires understanding, not proximity. He believed confidence could replace comprehension. I learned that preparation is the quietest form of power. I didn't lose a husband. I shed an illusion. And in doing so, I reclaimed something far more valuable than any valuation figure printed in a magazine. I reclaimed authorship over my life. The work continues, of course. Systems evolve, markets change. There are always new problems to solve. But now, I move forward without carrying someone else's assumptions on my back. I no longer confuse peace with silence. I no longer mistake charm for alignment. I no longer shrink to make someone else feel secure. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge or dominance. It's this: build with love, but protect with clarity. Trust deeply, but verify structurally. And never assume someone understands the value of what you've built just because they enjoy standing in its shadow. I placed the champagne glass on the table and walked back inside, not to hide, but to begin again. Not louder, not harder, just truer.